VP of Sales with Param Corporation, and today we're going to be talking about enterprise content management system deployment and really this idea of failing at those deployments and how do we turn them around. And it's interesting, this topic, because Param does webinars on pretty much a monthly basis on different topics around file classification, metadata tagging, migration issues. And really, this one of failing at ECM seems to really capture the largest audience. So I don't know if it's because there's failures out there that folks are familiar with or they're trying to avoid it, but regardless, we'll use that to say I think we're on topic, and we'll get into the conversation and talk about not only what the current state is that we hear from our clients, but what are some things that can help you improve your ECM deployment if you've already started. For those of you who haven't used GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar before, the sidebar on the right side of the screen will allow you to expand and close that up using the orange arrow. And in the bottom of that section, you should see a questions panel. So if there's any questions as we go through the presentation, feel free to enter them into that question section, and I will pop in there from time to time and just address anything that I see. So how do we measure success is an interesting question. We're talking about failing at ECM, so why do we think we failed is probably a good place to start. Most organizations that we speak with at one point in time have bought into this vision of what an enterprise content management system can do for them. And that's really this idea that there's one system that's going to manage their unstructured content from creation through to disposition. So the entire life cycle of that content. And most organizations, large organizations we talk to, have invested in some sort of platform, be it Documentum or a content server from OpenText, FileNet, or Microsoft SharePoint. Those are certainly among the more common ones we see, but there's a whole host of others as well that fall into the ECM realm. And I think it's safe to say that when we measure the actual deployments that we see compared to this kind of a vision, the projects are falling short, and they're falling, in most cases, way short. So that's, how do we get to this idea of failure is we've set an expectation of what the system is going to do, but we haven't really been able to meet it. In general, we speak with clients that have very similar experiences with enterprise content management. And I'm going to run through what we've consolidated down to this common story around enterprise content management system deployment. And it'll be interesting to see if you relate to this story. So a lot of the folks we speak with have had an enterprise content management system for quite a while, 5, 10 years or more. So it's not necessarily new deployments. And the industry itself is quite mature in terms of the number of years the vendors have been around selling these sorts of software systems. So it's not uncommon for organizations to have systems that have been around for a number of years, and it's not uncommon for organizations to have multiple systems from leading vendors within their organization for many reasons why that might be. Commonly, we find that those initial projects got off to an okay start. We looked within the organization, found a subset of documents or a business process that was identified as being important, and some number of thousands of documents were imported into the system. And the system was then used to manage those documents moving forward. The reality, though, for most is the wheels fell off at that point in terms of the migration and the implementation. And here we are maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, and ECM as a system is sitting there generally with about 5% or less of the files of the organization being managed in it. 5% of users actually accessing content in that system on a regular basis. So it really hurts us when we're trying to build, show any sort of ROI on this system, right? We've had this piece of technology that may have cost us millions of dollars to purchase and deploy, and we have a very small subset of users compared to what we originally envisioned actually using the system. The other side of that is the users that aren't in ECM are relatively happy using the shared drives or the file shares. They don't necessarily know what ECM could do for them or are concerned with that. They just know how to do their job, go about their daily business with the shared drive. So there's not a real push for them to come into the system. When we consolidate the information, we've been collecting information from organizations for a couple of years now on what percentage of content is in their ECM system. And from the folks we've spoken to and collected information on that, those who have ECM deployed, around 16% of their content currently sits in the system on average. So that includes the really good deployments as well as the lot that aren't so good. So you can see that average is down. This common story starts to make sense. There's some that maybe are on the other side bringing those numbers up, but this is pretty typical. And it would be interesting if we were all in the same room together to see a show of hands to see who relates to this. So what tends to happen is at some point we turn around and say, okay, what went wrong with this system deployment? And it may be, again, it may be 5 or 10 years down the road, but it's just a check-in to see what happened. And often the first place to look is at the technology, and we start to look and see, were there any challenges with the deployment? Did the technology not work? Was the architecture not suited for our environment? And then were the features not there? Go out to market. Is this still a valid system to be using? Largely when clients do that, they find, yes, it is. Different systems have some pluses and minuses, but rarely is it the technology that we can point to that was the issue. In fact, in most cases, there's lots of features that were never turned on, just never fully deployed because the system ran out of, the deployment ran out of steam. So there's more sitting there that we could tap into than we have. So when we look at this idea of failure or not meeting the potential of the system, it really comes down to how the system was deployed. And in general, those deployments in the past have focused on installing the system, finding a group that's interested in getting them deployed, getting a little bit of content in, and then avoiding the more difficult areas of the deployment. And those difficult areas really being, we have a lot of content and a lot of users that need to be transitioned. But we're not really sure how, so we're going to just hold off on that. And as a result, we have this enterprise content management system and this vision. So this vision that we bought into in this system, this technology that we actually purchased, that results in more of a departmental document management system, which isn't a bad thing. It's just something that we need to realize. We didn't really move towards enterprise content management at all. And that's, like I said, that's okay, but we need to look back at the context with which we made those original purchases and plans around. So quite often the vendors, enterprise content management system vendors, they sell the vision because they know the vision stretches for licenses. So if you're buying into enterprise content management, that means that you need to license every information worker in your company or a license of the ECM tool. If the reality, obviously the ECM vendors don't talk about the more difficult sides of deployment, that is not something they spend a lot of time on. So that really provides, creates this disconnect, right, where we have licenses for 100% of our information workers in a lot of cases, maybe not 100%, but certainly a large number. And we have a deployment plan that we're going forward with that is only going to hit 5%. So it leaves us with an impossible ROI. How are we ever going to say that this project was successful when we spent the money for an enterprise system and we were able to implement a document management system for a single department or a single document type or a single business process? So somewhat of a controversial question would be, how many licenses does your organization own of your enterprise content management technology? How many, what are you paying every year on maintenance on those licenses? And how does that compare to what's actually deployed? And unfortunately, those aren't very pretty numbers when we start to look at a system that's been around for 10 years and was purchased based on an ECM vision, and unfortunately the deployment never got there. So we come back to some fundamental questions. Did we overbuy? Did we just buy too much? We got caught up in this ECM vision, and really we didn't need to go there. We just needed to solve a specific problem. Or did we completely just under-deploy? We couldn't get the technology out for whatever reason. And that comes back to this core question of, is enterprise content management still the goal for the organization? Is that still something that we buy into? Is that a vision that we want to move towards? For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to assume it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but I'm going to assume that it is. So how can we turn some of this around and start to fix these problems? We're going to work through 5 trouble spots that we've identified with traditional deployment plans and give you some thoughts there. So migration, file classification, the use of metadata, the involvement of users in this whole process, and managing the change over to the new system. The first area we're going to look at is this area of migration. And very simply put, you know, in terms of a term, content brings users. So if there's no content in your enterprise content management system, you shouldn't be surprised that nobody's using it. And to extend that one step further, if we're leaving the shared drives or the file shares as an alternative to ECM, the shared drives are going to win, right? So the shared drives, I can go in, I can create folders, I can move things around. Nobody's really concerned with what I'm doing. I can squirrel away everything I want to squirrel away, deepen some folders, and I'm confident I have what I have. The shared drives work for an individual. We need to really understand that. They work for an individual. They don't work for the enterprise. But in order to give the ECM system a chance, we need to shut down the shared drives. We need to have a real plan to say, it's not here or there. It's ECM is the system for unstructured content moving forward. All content in shared drives will be cleaned, migrated, shut down. Otherwise, you're not going to be working there. We're making a transition, and that has really hurt a lot of deployments. They didn't transition; they simply opened a new system. Now, looking back historically at the type of approaches that have been taken to migration around ECM, they fall into a couple of categories. One is migrate the mess. So really, we have a set of content on the file shares or the shared drive that is somewhat disorganized. There's some level of chaos there. We just pick it up and we migrate it straight into the ECM system. That really does very little for the organization, because in order for the ECM system to work, we need to tell the system what this content is, right? Through the use of a folder structure or through the use of metadata, We need to provide context to the system so that the system can know how to manage this content. So simply picking it up and moving it does very little from a records management point of view or information management point of view. We may get some improved searching, but that's pretty much it. By far the more popular view over the past, I'm going to say, 15 years or more, has been a day-forward approach to enterprise content system deployment. And this is the one that has left us with so many implementations with 5% of their content in the system after 10 years. Because it sounds great. You know, we're part of a ECM project deployment team. We're setting up the system. We're getting the architecture sorted out. Maybe we're setting up some folders. And then all of a sudden someone in the meeting says, what are we going to do with, 10 million files sitting over there? That's a big mess. And the room goes quiet for a bit, and then finally someone says, stay forward. We're just going to say, new content gets created in the system. Well, that takes the load off in the short term for sure, but it certainly hurts the organization long term. And we can see that all over the place. So if you have any doubt in your mind about that, please find some colleagues, ask them what happened at their company, and get informed about how this works, because really it is the reason that these systems are not being used today, the ones that were deployed 10 years ago. It simply doesn't work. Individuals are not going to go into a new system and begin creating information so that hopefully they get some value out of that system. They're going to continue working in the shared drives and getting their job done. Furthermore, when we go with one of those two approaches and the users do poke their head into the software and they take a look around and they see that A, either it's still a mess, well, great, that does nothing for me, or B, there's no content, or C, well, they did some stuff, but it doesn't really relate to what I do. I don't see the folders, a structure that makes sense for me. It really reinforces the use of the shared drive. So we need to be careful about that, because they say, I don't know what's going on with that ECM system, that corporate project that's going on. I'm just going to go back and squirrel away more stuff in my shared drive so I know that regardless of what they do, I'm going to be able to do my job. So you can see bad projects further creating problems in this space, because we're really saying go back to the shared drive and make sure you know what you have. The second area that we need to address next to migration is really around content classification. So we need to understand the information we have in order to manage it. So ECM is all about managing information, but we need to have some context and some understanding of what we have. That means both legacy, right? We just talked about the importance of bringing forward the legacy content and the new content. It also means don't put content into your enterprise content management system if you don't know how you're going to identify it for disposition. And we speak with organizations all of the time who have done so. Now they have files in there and they don't necessarily have a plan for how they're going to be able to run them through their full life cycle and disposition notes. I'm going to take a quick pop over to questions. I don't see anything in there yet, but we're going to run pretty close to time here. So if you have anything, just enter it and I'll try to get in and take a look at it right before we wrap up. So along with classifying files and applying metadata is really setting up this folder structure, this information structure of ECM. So what we need to do is be able to create a structure that is recognizable by the business so that when they enter into the system, it makes sense to them, these folders, and the ability to use metadata to pull back information, but then complies with the records management policies of the organization. So that's a big part of the classification effort, is getting the information structure right. In order to get the information structure right, we've been doing this for 14 years. We've come to the conclusion that you can't get that right in a boardroom, talking theoretically, about how to organize content, it comes from content analysis, getting knee-deep in the content itself, understanding what doc types, what content you have, how it's traditionally been organized, what the business needs, and then being able to build out a folder structure that makes sense to them. Metadata historically, I think, has been underutilized because it has been, again, it's another one of these, there's effort to it, right? And traditionally, there's been more effort than there is today. But it's really metadata beyond your folders, folders just being another type of metadata within the ECM system. Additional metadata on top of folders is what helps the system do what we want it to do. So all of the interactions with content through the ECM system can be improved or refined through the effective tagging of content with metadata so that the system can better do its job. So that's really the user experience. We're talking about workflows, the ability to disposition content. Our searchability is certainly improved just through some tagging with effective metadata. So building that metadata out and getting a plan together in terms of how we're going to tag legacy content so that it doesn't just come in and go into a big pile and then is not able to be useful within the system is important. The fourth tip that we have here is around involving users in this process. So if we deem success of the ECM system as having both content and users in the system, right? So those are the two real ingredients. We need to move the content and we need to ensure that the users are going to come with that content into the system. And in order to appreciate that, we need to realize that the users themselves, the generalization, but they don't differentiate between the information structure of the enterprise content management system and the technology itself, right? They just come in, they see a system, and it either works for them or it doesn't. And we need to, as part of the deployment, realize that all of this great technology that we've invested in means nothing if we're not creating an information structure within it that works for each of our business areas so that they can see themselves in it. They can immediately identify with how they're going to use the information structure to access content, because that's the big fear, really. How am I going to find files? And we spend a lot of time in this area as well. And if we take just a very kind of simple model here, function, activity, subject, topic, subtopic model, what we really focused on is not what tends to work for us, I should say, is not trying to be purists and push down something from the top that works solely for records management, but starting from the top, putting something in that sound from a records management and from an ECM point of view, and then doing some content analysis and some interaction with the users to see what they need at the lower levels and then begin to marry these two together. And when we do that successfully, everybody's happy. Okay? But it really takes understanding the content of the organization and again, the types of content that you have, how it's best organized, and how the business wants to get and retrieve it to be able to get that structure right for ECM. The last major point here is around the change management aspects of this type of a project. And I came up with this one a while ago, and it still holds true. If you build it, they will still be in the shared drive. So, you know, it's kind of a funny quote to use this time of year. Maybe a basketball quote would be more appropriate, but spring is coming, and baseball season will be here at some point. If you build it, they're not just going to show up. We need a plan for how to get them into the system. So that means that information structure I'm talking about needs to be there. They need to be able to relate to it. We need to move the content, shut down the shared drive, so there's no competition with the enterprise content management system. And we need to get this change management piece right. so that we support the users in this transition. And that really means supporting their adoption of two parts of this. Again, pull apart the ECM system and realize that we're talking about technology and we're talking about a new information structure. And provide change management training on those separately. So here's the new structure of your information. Here's how you're going to browse. It's not that much different. We made these changes, and you can search by certain metadata elements to allow you to refine searches. And by the way, here's how the technology works. So we need to realize that the users aren't going to be able to focus on your technology training if they aren't comfortable with your information structure. Because you're going to be telling them about what buttons to push, and all they're going to be thinking is where you put my content, where you put my files, how am I going to find them, right? And those are two different things. So break those apart and make sure we handle it effectively. And we have found over the years that providing an interactive map between old state and new state has been a really effective way to bring comfort with this new information structure. So that will really something that will allow the users to locate content the way it was stored in their shared drive and show where it is now in this new information structure of ECM. That really has helped get people over the hump and into the new system. Change management has to start when the project starts. So they involving the business in the design of this information structure is critical. Getting some important feedback from them in terms of what they want to see as a structure. Bringing them in just before migration and doing some training so everybody's in the loop. And then following up with those tools after the fact so that you're supporting all of that good work you're doing with some tools that allow them to see, okay, here's the then and now, how I get from one to another. And overwhelmingly, keeping in mind the goal is to move people and content at the same time, right? There's lots of different variations of, oh, we're going to move half the files and then we're going to come back next year, and all of this. If we can focus on one thing, move people and content at the same time and shut down the shared drives, then we're transitioning. If we don't do that, we have competition between the two, and you know who's going to win. So in summary, we're coming up to time. I will pop into questions in just a second. To close things up, in order to get to effective enterprise content management, reel it back, reel it in, and focus on basic document management. It sounds counterintuitive. It's really just about getting the foundation. So you cannot practice enterprise content management without everyone in the organization practicing document management, basic document management in the system. And that's where we need to focus. And you would be surprised how many perceived advanced ECM processes, workflows actually go away, the requirement for go away, when we just do basic document management in an ECM system. The other one is I'm always surprised by the amount of money that gets spent on additional software purchases for systems that aren't deployed. I don't understand it, but it's something that needs to be addressed if you're going to move forward, right? So advanced ECM functionality is probably years away for most organizations, and that's if they get cracking and take a serious run at this. So again, readjust your expectations, get back to basics. Everyone needs to do document management first. And the theme of the presentation being make your enterprise content management system the system moving forward, not just another system for managing files within the organization. As you may be aware or may not, Param Corporation provides services around the type of work that we're talking about today. So if it's something you'd like to learn more about, if you have specific scenarios you'd like to discuss, feel free to contact us, and we would be glad to talk to you about our services around all of this file cleanup, classification, tagging, migration, and change management support. There are, I do see a question, so I'm going to pop into the panel. Good question came in. It says, how do you migrate content already in ECM into an enriched metadata model? So if I understand the question correctly, there are many cases where content has been migrated into the system without the full information structure either being built out or applied. So at that point, depending on the system itself, we need to probably extract, bring the content back out, apply the metadata that we're interested in, maybe rework the folders, and then as we're happy with it, we would then potentially re-import. That's a common approach because it gives us, when we take it out, we can work with it in another platform that allows us to make those changes more easily. But that's going to depend specific to your systems that you're using. So if that's something you'd like to discuss, specific questions about content that exists in your software already, feel free to get in touch and we can talk more specifically about the technology you're using. All right. I think that's the only question I see in the panel right now. So I'm going to thank everyone for their time. Hopefully this was of some value to you. And again, if you'd like to continue the discussion, like to get deeper in terms of the how, feel free to let us know. We keep plans to do so. I did record the session, so it should be available. So if it's something that you'd like to share with colleagues, again, let me know, and we'll be able to get that out to you as well. I'm going to thank everyone for their time, and hope you have a great day.